The Lady of the House of Love by Angela Carter.
Blood. Vampires. At last the revenants became so troublesome, the peasants abandoned the village, and it fell solely into the possession of subtle and vindictive inhabitants, who manifest their presences by shadows that fall almost imperceptibly awry. Too many shadows, even at midday, shadows that have no source in anything visible. Now all shun the village below the chateau in which the beautiful somnambulist helplessly perpetuates her ancestral crimes. Wearing an antique bridal gown, the beautiful queen of the vampires sits all alone in her dark, high house, under the eyes of the portraits of her demented ancestors, each one of whom, through her, projects a baleful, posthumous existence. She counts out the tarot cards, ceaselessly construing a constellation of possibilities, as if the random fall of the cards on the red plush tablecloth could precipitate her from her chill, shuttered room into a country of perpetual summer and obliterate the perennial sadness of a girl who is both death and the maiden. The castle is mostly given over to ghostly occupants, but she herself has her own suite of drawing-room and bedroom. Closely barred shutters and heavy velvet curtains keep out every leak of natural light. This room is never more than faintly illuminated by a heavily shaded lamp on the mantelpiece, and the dark, red-figured wallpaper is obscurely, distressingly patterned by the rain that drives in through the neglected roof and leaves behind it random areas of staining, ominous marks like those left on the sheets by dead lovers. But the mistress of all this disintegration notices nothing. She sits in a chair covered in moth-ravaged burgundy velvet at the low round table and distributes the cards. Sometimes her pet lark sings, but more often remains a sullen mound of drab feathers. Sometimes the Countess will wake it for a brief cadenza by strumming the bars of its cage. She likes to hear it announce how it cannot escape. She is so beautiful, she is unnatural. Her beauty is an abnormality, a deformity, for none of her features exhibit any of those touching imperfections that reconcile us to the imperfection of the human condition. Her beauty is a symptom of her disorder, of her soullessness. Her teeth, as fine and white as spikes of spun sugar, are the visible signs of the destiny she wistfully attempts to evade via the arcana. She is the last bud of the poison tree that sprang from the loins of Vlad the Impaler, who picnicked on corpses in the forests of Transylvania. A chignoned priest of the Orthodox faith staked out her wicked father at a Carpathian crossroad before her milk teeth grew. Just as they staked him out, the fatal count cried, "Nosferatu is dead! Long live Nosferatu!" Now she possesses all the haunted forests and mysterious habitations of his vast domain. But the Countess herself is indifferent to her own weird authority, as if she were dreaming it. In her dream, she would like to be human, but she does not know if that is possible. The tarot always shows the same configuration. Always she turns up la papesse, la mort, la tour abolie, wisdom, death, dissolution. On moonless nights, her keeper lets her out into the garden. All the roses her dead mother planted have grown up into a huge, spiked wall that incarcerates her in the castle of her inheritance. When the back door opens, the Countess will sniff the air and howl. She drops now on all fours, crouching, quivering. She catches the scent of her prey. The eyes of this nocturnal creature enlarge and glow. All claws and teeth, she strikes, she gorges, but nothing can console her for the ghastliness of her condition, nothing. An old mute looks after her to make sure she never sees the sun, that all day she stays in her coffin, to keep mirrors and all reflective surfaces away from her. In short, to perform all the functions of the servants of vampires. Everything about this beautiful and ghastly lady is as it should be, queen of night, queen of terror, except her horrible reluctance for the role. Nevertheless, if an unwise adventurer pauses in the square of the deserted village to refresh himself at the fountain, a crone in a black dress and white apron presently emerges from a house. She will invite you with smiles and gestures. You will follow her. The Countess wants fresh meat. When she was a little girl, she contented herself entirely with baby rabbits, with voles and field mice that palpitated for a bare moment between her embroideress's fingers. But now she is a woman. She must have men. If you stop too long beside the giggling fountain, you will be led by the hand to the Countess's larder. When the sun drops behind the mountain, she yawns and stirs and puts on the only dress she has, her mother's wedding dress, to sit and read her cards until she grows hungry. Afterwards, her governess will tidy the remains into a neat pile and wrap it in its own discarded clothes. This mortal parcel she then discreetly buries in the garden. One hot, ripe summer, in the pubescent years of the last century, a young officer in the British Army, blonde, blue-eyed, decided to spend the remainder of his furlough exploring the little-known uplands of Romania. When he quixotically decided to travel the rutted cart tracks by bicycle, he saw all the humour of it. On 2 wheels in the land of the vampires. So, laughing, he sets out on his adventure. He has the special quality of virginity, most and least ambiguous of states. Ignorance, yet at the same time power in potentia, and furthermore unknowingness, which is not the same as ignorance. He is more than he knows, and has about him, besides, the special glamour of that generation for whom history has already prepared a special, exemplary fate in the trenches of France. This being, rooted in change and time, is about to collide with the timeless Gothic eternity of the vampires, whose cards always fall in the same pattern. Although so young, he is also rational. He has chosen the most rational mode of transport in the world. To ride a bicycle is in itself some protection against superstitious fears, since the bicycle is the product of pure reason applied to motion, geometry at the service of man. A single kiss woke up the sleeping beauty in the wood. The waxen fingers of the Countess turn up the card called Les Amoureux. Never before has the Countess cast herself a fate involving love. She shakes, she trembles. The lovely cartomancer has this time, the first time, dealt herself a hand of love and death. At the mauvish beginnings of evening, the English monsieur toils up the hill to the village he glimpsed from a great way off. He hopes to find a friendly inn to rest the night. He's hot, hungry, thirsty, weary, dusty. At first, such disappointment to discover the roofs of all the cottages caved in and tall weeds thrusting through the piles of fallen tiles. But the adventure of it all, and the fountain where the village women used to wash their clothes, still gushing out bright, clear water, these considerations soon overcame his disappointment, even assuaged the faint unease he'd felt. When he raised his dripping, gratified head from the lion's mouth, he saw, silently arrived beside him in the square, an old woman who smiled eagerly at him. She bobbed a curtsy at the young man and beckoned him to follow her. When he hesitated, she pointed towards the great bulk of the mansion above them, rubbed her stomach, pointed to her mouth, rubbed her stomach again, clearly miming an invitation to supper. Then she beckoned him again, this time turning determinedly upon her heel as though she would brook no opposition. A great intoxicated surge of the heavy scent of red roses blew into his face as soon as they left the village, inducing a sensuous vertigo. Too many roses bloomed on enormous thickets that lined the path, their huge congregations of plush petals somehow obscene in their excess, their walled, tightly budded cores outrageous in their implications. The mansion emerged grudgingly out of this jungle. He could almost have regretted accepting the crone's unspoken invitation, but now, standing before the door of time-eroded oak, he knew it was too late to turn back, and brusquely reminded himself he was no child now to be frightened of his own fancies. The old lady unlocked the door, which swung back on melodramatically creaking hinges, and fussily took charge of his bicycle, in spite of his protests. He felt a certain involuntary sinking of the heart to see his beautiful two-wheeled symbol of rationality vanish into the dark entrails of the mansion. But, in for a penny, in for a pound, in his youth and strength and blonde beauty, in the invisible, even unacknowledged pentacle of his virginity, the young man stepped over the threshold of Nosferatu's castle and did not shiver in the blast of cold air that emanated from the lightless, cavernous interior. The crone took him to a little chamber where there was a black oak table spread with a clean white cloth, and this cloth was carefully laid with heavy silverware, a little tarnished, as if someone with foul breath had breathed on it, but laid with one place only. Curiouser and curiouser, invited to the castle for dinner, now he must dine alone. The crone disappeared, but soon returned bearing a steaming platter of the local spiced meat stew with dumplings and a shank of black bread. When he'd put away a second plateful, the old woman came and gestured he should leave the table and follow her once again. She made a pantomime of drinking. He deduced he was now invited to take after-dinner coffee in another room with some more elevated member of the household who had not wished to dine with him, but all the same wanted to make his acquaintance. He was surprised to find how ruinous the interior of the house was. Cobwebs, worm-eaten beans, crumbling plaster. But the mute crone resolutely wound him on the reel of her lantern down endless corridors. At last she paused, and behind the door where they'd halted he heard a faint metallic twang, as of perhaps a chord struck on a harpsichord, and then wonderfully the liquid cascade of the song of a lark, bringing to him in the heart, had he but known it, of Juliet's tomb, all the freshness of morning. The crone rapped with her knuckles on the panels. The most seductively caressing voice he had ever heard in his life softly called out in heavily accented French, the adopted language of the Romanian aristocracy. Entrez. First of all, he saw only a shape imbued with a faint luminosity, since it caught and reflected in its yellowed surfaces what little light there was in the ill-lit room. This shape resolved itself into that of all things, a hoop-skirted dress of white satin, a dress 50 or 60 years out of fashion, but once obviously intended for a wedding. So that it was little by little, as his eyes grew accustomed to the half-dark, that he saw how beautiful and how very young the bedizened scarecrow was, and he thought of a child dressing up in her mother's clothes, perhaps a child putting on the clothes of a dead mother in order to bring her, however briefly, to life again. The Countess stood behind a low table. Her huge dark eyes almost broke his heart with their waif-like lost look, yet he was disturbed, almost repelled, by her extraordinarily fleshy mouth, a mouth with wide, full, prominent lips of a vibrant purplish crimson, a morbid mouth, even... But he put the thought away from him immediately. A whore's mouth. She was the chatelaine of all this decay. With many tender precautions, the crone now raised the light she held to show his hostess her guest's face. At that, the Countess let out a faint, mewing cry, and made a blind, appalled gesture with her hands as if pushing him away, so that she knocked against the table, and a butterfly dazzle of painted cards fell to the floor. A bewildering reception. Tusking under her breath, the crone busily poked about on the table until she found an enormous pair of dark green glasses, such as blind beggars wear, and perched them on the Countess's nose. He went forward to pick up her cards for her, shuffled them carelessly together, for they meant nothing to him, though they seemed strange playthings for a young girl. What a grisly picture of a capering skeleton! He covered it up with a happier one, of two young lovers smiling at one another, and put her toys back into a hand, so slender you could almost see the frail net of bone beneath the translucent skin. At his touch she seemed to revive a little and almost smiled, raising herself upright. "Coffee," she said. "You must have coffee." The crone found him a chair and, tittering noiselessly, departed, leaving the room a little darker. While the young lady attended to the coffee-making, he had time to contemplate with some distaste a series of family portraits which decorated the stained and peeling walls. These livid faces all seemed contorted with a febrile madness, and the blubber lips, the huge demented eyes that all had in common, bore a disquieting resemblance to those of the hapless victim of inbreeding, now patiently filtering her fragrant brew, even if some rare grace has so finely transformed those features when it came to her case. Soon she held out to him a tiny cup of rose-painted china. "Welcome," she said in her voice with the rushing sonorities of the ocean in it. "Welcome to my chateau. I rarely receive visitors, and that's a misfortune, since nothing animates me half as much as the presence of a stranger. This place is so lonely, now the village is deserted, and my one companion, alas, she cannot speak. Often I am so silent that I think I too will soon forget how to do so, and nobody here will ever talk any more." Her voice, issuing from those red lips like the obese roses in her garden, her voice is curiously disembodied. She is like a doll, he thought, a ventriloquist's doll, or more, like a great ingenious piece of clockwork, for she seemed inadequately powered by some slow energy of which she was not in control. This idea that she might be an automaton never quite deserted him. Indeed, it deeply moved his heart. "And the light, I must apologize for the lack of light, a hereditary affliction of the eyes." Her blind spectacles gave him his handsome face back to himself twice over. "Vous serez ma proie." "You will be my prey." "You have such a fine throat, monsieur, like a column of marble. When you came through the door retaining about you all the golden light of the summer's day, of which I know nothing, nothing, the card called Les Amoureux had just emerged from the tumbling chaos of imagery before me. It seemed to me you had stepped off the card into my darkness, and for a moment I thought perhaps you might irradiate it. The bridegroom is come. He will go into the chamber which has been prepared for him. And could love free me from the shadows? Can a bird sing only the song it knows, or can it learn a new song? See how I'm ready for you. I've always been ready for you. I've been waiting for you in my wedding dress. Why have you delayed so long? It will all be over very quickly. You will feel no pain, my darling." One kiss, however, and only one, woke up the sleeping beauty in the wood. Nervously, to conceal her inner voices, she keeps up a front of inconsequential chatter in French. However hard she tries to think of any other, she only knows of one kind of consummation. A fundamental disbelief in what he sees before him sustains him, even in the boudoir of Countess Nosferatu herself. He would have said, perhaps, that there are some things which, even if they are true, we should not believe possible. Not so much that he does not believe in her. He can see her. She is real. But since he himself is immune to shadow, due to his virginity, he does not yet know what there is to be afraid of. And due to his heroism, which makes him like the sun, he sees before him, first and foremost, an inbred, highly-strung girl-child, fatherless, motherless, kept in the dark too long, and pale as a plant that never sees the light, half-blinded by some hereditary condition of the eyes. And though he feels unease, he cannot feel terror. So he is like the boy in the fairy tale who does not know how to shudder. This lack of imagination gives his heroism to the hero. He will learn to shudder in the trenches, but this girl cannot make him shudder. Now it is dark. The coffee is all drunk. Her chatter comes trickling and diminishing to a stop. Owls shriek. The impedimenta of her condition squeak and gibber all around us. Now you are at the place of annihilation. Now you are at the place of annihilation.
Suivez-moi. Je vous attendais. Vous serez ma proie.
Dinner time, clang the portraits on the walls. A ghastly hunger gnaws her entrails. The handsome bicyclist, scarcely believing his luck, will follow her into her bedroom. She will assure him in the very voice of temptation, "My clothes have but to fall, and you will see before you a succession of mysteries." In her low, sweet voice, she will croon the lullaby of the house of Nosferatu. "Embraces, kisses, your golden head of the sun, even if I've only seen the picture of the sun on the tarot card, your golden head of the lover whom I dreamed would one day free me, this head will fall back, its eyes roll upwards in a spasm you will mistake for that of love and not of death. The bridegroom bleeds on my inverted marriage bed." Stark and dead, poor bicyclist. He has paid the price of a night with the Countess, and some think it too high a fee, while some do not. Tomorrow her keeper will bury his bones under her roses. The food her roses feed on gives them their rich colour, their swooning odour that breathes lasciviously of forbidden pleasures. "Suivez-moi." "Suivez-moi." The handsome bicyclist, fearful for his hostess's health, her sanity, gingerly follows her hysterical imperiousness into the other room. What a macabre bedroom! His colonel, an old goat with jaded appetites, had given him the visiting card of a brothel in Paris, where, the satyr assured him, 10 louis would buy just such a lugubrious bedroom, with a naked girl upon a coffin. He had good-naturedly refused the old man's offer of such an initiation. How can he now take criminal advantage of this disordered girl, with eyes that deny all the erotic promises of her body, with their terror, their sadness, their dreadful balked tenderness? So delicate and damned, poor thing, quite damned. Yet I do believe she scarcely knows what she is doing. She is shaking as if her limbs were not efficiently joined together, as if she might shake into pieces. She raises her hands to unfasten the neck of her dress. She can't take off her mother's wedding dress unless she takes off her dark glasses. She has fumbled the ritual. It is no longer inexorable. When she takes off the dark glasses, they slip from her fingers and smash to pieces on the tiled floor. There is no room in her drama for improvisation, and this unexpected, mundane noise of breaking glass breaks the wicked spell in the room entirely. When she kneels to try to gather the fragments of glass together, a sharp sliver pierces deeply into the pad of her thumb. She cries out, sharp, real. She has never seen her own blood before, not her own blood. It exercises upon her an odd fascination. Into this vile and murderous room, the handsome bicyclist brings the innocent remedies of the nursery. In himself, by his presence, he is an exorcism. He gently takes her hand away from her and dabs the blood with his own handkerchief, but still it spurts out. And so he puts his mouth to the wound. He will kiss it better for her, as her mother, had she lived, would have done. Her painted ancestors turn away their eyes and grind their fangs. How can she bear the pain of becoming human? The end of exile is the end of being. He was awakened by lark song. The shutters, the curtains, even the long-sealed windows of the horrid bedroom were all opened up, and light and air streamed in. She must have set her pet lark free, because it perched on the edge of the silly coffin to sing him its ecstatic morning song. His bones were stiff and aching. He'd slept on the floor with his bundled-up jacket for a pillow after he'd put her to bed. But now there was no trace of her to be seen, except lightly tossed across the crumpled black satin bed cover, a lace negligee, lightly soiled with blood, as it might be from a woman's menses, and a rose that must have come from the fierce bushes nodding through the window. He padded into the boudoir, his mind busy with plans. We shall take her to Zurich to a clinic. She will be treated for nervous hysteria. Then to an eye specialist for her photophobia, and to a dentist to put her teeth into better shape. Any competent manicurist will deal with her claws. We shall turn her into the lovely girl she is. I shall cure her of all these nightmares. The heavy curtains are pulled back to let in brilliant fusillades of early morning light. In the desolation of the boudoir, she sits at her round table in her white dress, with the cards laid out before her. She has dropped off to sleep over the cards of destiny that are so fingered, so soiled, so worn by constant shuffling, that you can no longer make the image out on any single one of them. She is not sleeping. In death, she looked far older, less beautiful, and so, for the first time, fully human.
I will vanish in the morning light. I was only an invention of darkness, and I leave you as a souvenir the dark-fanged rose I plucked, like a flower laid on a grave. On a grave. My keeper will attend to everything.
And now the crone materialized, weeping, and roughly gestured him to be gone. After a search in some foul-smelling outhouses, he discovered his bicycle and, abandoning his holiday, rode directly to Bucharest, where, at the post-restaurant, he found a telegram summoning him to rejoin his regiment at once. Much later, when he changed back into uniform in his quarters, he discovered he still had the Countess's rose. He must have tucked it into the breast pocket of his cycling jacket after he had found her body. Curiously enough, although he had brought it so far away from Romania, the flower did not seem to be quite dead, and, on impulse, because the girl had been so lovely and her death so unexpected and pathetic, he decided to try and resurrect her rose. He filled his toothglass with water from the carafe on his locker and popped the rose into it, so that its withered head floated on the surface. When he returned from the mess that evening, the heavy fragrance of Count Nosferatu's roses drifted down the stone corridor to greet him, and his Spartan quarters brimmed with the reeling odour of a glowing, monstrous flower whose petals had regained all their former bloom, their corrupt, brilliant, baleful splendour. Next day, his regiment embarked for France.
Indira Varma was reading The Lady of the House of Love by Angela Carter. The story was abridged and produced by Gemma Jenkins.